And I want to stress that if there's pain for the mother, it's worse for the baby, because these contractions are crushing your baby and they are causing fetal distress. Now these dark ones know that Pitocin causes fetal distress. In fact, that's part of why they're using it. Doctors have been known to do a protocol called PIT to distress, which is an order given to nurses that basically says to the nurses, give this woman an overdose of Pitocin, very high levels of Pitocin, so that we can deliberately distress the baby and move more quickly to a C-section. And nurses are blogging about it. And this is how we know what's going on. And this way a doctor can get to his golf game or wherever it is that he's got to go so that he doesn't have to be bothered hanging out waiting for this birth process to happen naturally. That's the last thing, that we really want to have happen if we're in a hospital. At least that's the last thing they want to have happen. Because of the distress, they're going to do what's called fetal heart monitoring, usually continuous fetal heart monitoring. And with continuous fetal heart monitoring, sometimes it's internal. And what's involved here is that they will take a probe. They will put their arms, their hands, their fists inside of a laboring mother and screw this probe into the baby's skull.
Yes.
Yes. So every time there's a contraction, that probe will pull and tug at the baby's skull, creating further immense pain for the baby. And of course, babies who have this don't like to have their heads touched, and they have a variety of other problems. Deep wounds on their head, deep wounds to their spiritual capacities as well, because that soft spot in the baby's skull is otherwise where the baby would be receiving a download of information as it makes its transition from the spiritual realm into the physical realm. And instead, it's going to be receiving immense pain. This is all purposeful. This is all methodical. This is all evil. What mind would think to screw something into the baby's skull? What kind of psychopath would have that thought? Think about this, folks.
I'm glad the nurses are blogging about this, but they're still following orders. When I had my son Joey, you're basically describing exactly what happened. Of course, I was unconscious at that time as well. I was given Pitocin and told I needed, to have, my labor wasn't, I forget the term they used. It wasn't, working well enough, whatever word they used. So they put me on Pitocin. I was in labor for about 36 hours. It was absolute hell. And just like you said, I was begging the doctor, I can't take it anymore. And eventually he did do a C-section. And, of course, I didn't realize all the ramifications of any of these things until years later. But I experienced this myself. And it's just unbelievable. And having a C-section, there are problems with the mother down the line from that as well, because you're not supposed to have your uterus cut open. That's not how the whole birth process was designed. It's very disturbing to me that the nurses are following these orders. But, of course, that's what the nurses are supposed to do. And it is truly amazing how all of these procedures have been put in place. Nobody's questioning these things except for, people like us. The people in the hospital, they just do what they're told. It's part of the standard of practice. The doctors are basically being forced now to do insane things, to keep their license or to get insurance coverage, and they're going along with it. It's disgusting.
It is disgusting, and again, people are doing it because they're mind controlled or they're afraid to lose their job or whatever. Obviously, the nurses are upset about it, or they wouldn't be blogging about it. But we should know that it is happening, and that Pitocin is a real problem. And once you let them induce you or give you Pitocin, it's all going to be downhill. I'm telling you, folks, it's not a good thing. And if they can't get the Pitocin in you while you're laboring, they're going to give it to you when what they call the third stage of labor, after the baby comes out and you're giving birth to the placenta, and that's because they want to get that Pitocin into you to prevent bonding from happening. That's a key.
Right, and prevent the breastfeeding. And that's another thing I experienced. I was bound and determined to breastfeed. I ended up being in the hospital for 6 days after my C-section. And if it weren't for one nurse who was, right there by my side and was coaching me and teaching me, And I told her there's no way I'm not going to breastfeed. And she kept with me, and eventually I was able to breastfeed. But I know that what happens with most mothers is they just give up and they say, oh, it's not working, I'm not producing milk enough, and now we know why. And so, yeah, just give them some formula.
Yep. Yeah. There's so much I could say about the formula too, but let's do this. Okay, so now we got the mother screaming, right, begging for the epidural, and so in comes the epidural. Epidural is an anesthesia that they inject directly into the cerebral spinal fluid of the mother, which is absolute also what they're doing in trauma-based mind control. If you could see what these doctors have been up to for the last 100 years almost, you would see that this is an exact replication of what they're doing during trauma-based mind control.